Hello, my name is Ryan Ivy. I have Chapter 19, Broadband and Home Networks for our presentation. This is a really interesting chapter. Before we dig into the content, I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in, and also just tell everyone that you all have done an incredible job so far this semester, putting a lot of hard work into your projects, and I've enjoyed getting to know y'all as we have conversed on the discussion boards. But without further ado, our topic, the issue that we're talking about with broadband and home networks is the way that people get to connect to the internet. And so since the internet's conception and the creation of the World Wide Web, people needed a way to connect to that. And so primarily the way that that's happened is through broadband, and more broadband, just kind of a better definition for that, or better understanding, is high-speed internet connection. And high-speed internet connection is really relative, and traditionally in the United States we consider anything over 25 megabytes per second as high-speed internet. And then home networks is just typically how it best translates to people having internet connection in their home. So we start on the first slide, titled Broadband. Broadband really began to come about with the Telecommunications Act of 1996. This act allowed access to the internet through phone lines, through cable, and through so many different things. And so it really just opened the market for telecommunication and through internet access and internet service providers to really begin giving access to the whole market, the whole average person. And so we're just going to run through the different types of internet connections and broadbands, and from the most common to the least common. The very first one we have on our list, which is the most common, is DSL. It stands for Digital Subscriber Line. And this is probably the first internet connection you have experience with in your house. I know I did growing up, but it's a telephone line that goes into a modem in your home. In the early stages, this was very common, called dial-up, right? I know for me growing up, if we wanted to get on the internet, we couldn't use the landline because we only had one internet connection. We only had one phone connection, and so you couldn't do one while doing the other. It's advanced very much since then, but that's the most common still today is DSL. And the next is FTTN, which is fiber to the node. And this is one of the fastest growing networks and uses of broadband. And what this is internet coming in through other sources. Most commonly known as one of the biggest ones is UVerse. UVerse is a FTTN network when they're coming in not through a satellite or through telephone lines, but they're coming in through fiber. And so this is a really big market, and it's continuing to grow and grow with the introduction of AT&T UVerse. And the third largest provider of broadband would be cable. And the way cable provides this service is through the same cable lines that come in your house to provide you with internet. To provide you with television, also can provide you internet. One of the largest providers here is Comcast, Xfinity, and these three contain about 97% of the entire broadband and internet market. There's not really any other competitors outside of these three. We're going to talk about three more, but these are really the focus. If you have internet connection in your home or business, it's probably through one of these three different types of providers. But it also goes a little bit farther. There's satellite connection, which if you have this type of connection, you have a modem in your house, which is connected to a small satellite that sends signals to get internet connection in your home. And the reason that most people don't have this, one, it's not super reliable because it's not very fast. And the other types of internet connection, if they're available, they're much, much faster. But this is available to people in much more urban settings that don't have DSL or cable options. They can have satellite options. It's also very expensive. And so it's slow, not a good product, and very expensive. But some people, it's their only option. Another is wireless, having their internet provided through a service. You see this mainly in people's phones, but people like Verizon and other companies are expanding this to even other networks to allow access to a variety of things in people's homes, and people are relying more on more wireless connections via their data plans. And so this is another viable option to have internet in your home. And the last one that was expected to be a really big hit was broadband over power lines, BPL. And broadband over power lines, every single home has power lines connected to them, is getting power. And so it was expected that, hey, let's figure out a way to tap into those and get internet into people's houses through the cables and things that's already there. This turned out to be really unsuccessful and very spotty. And so it's the smallest percentage of the market and probably will just be completely obsolete and non-existent in the very near future. If you turn to our next slide, you see home networks, because when we were talking about broadband, that's the same for businesses and for homes and everything of the sort. But now we want to get to the more specifics of how do those things practically come into the home. And there's a couple things that brought about the need for home networks, because whenever the internet, the World Wide Web was really first invented, nobody was really thinking this is something that we were going to need in our everyday lives in all of our homes. But what brought that about was people began having multiple computer homes. People began using computers and the internet for things other than work, for enjoyment, for pleasure, and even for side work. And so more and more the need became that people needed internet in their homes. And so we shifted to these home networks, and it's really two ways that this can happen. Home networks, those wired networks, and also wireless networks. And we kind of got into some of these a little bit just before, but wired networks are typically a lot more expensive and a lot harder because you're dealing with more hardware and wires, obviously. But also, older built homes are not constructed in such a way to be conducive to have these type of wired networks inside the homes. Because typically it takes a lot of Cat5 to be ran. That's the type of Ethernet cable to be run through the home to be connected. One of the advantages of wired networks is steady, ongoing connection that a lot of people in wireless networks tend to not have advantage of. But most commonly, people in most houses today enjoy a wireless network which uses low frequency radio signals. The most common that you would know would be called Wi-Fi, where a internet signal comes into a house through a variety of ways, then connects to a modem. And what that modem does is disperses that signal, the wireless network signal, through low frequency radio signals throughout a small space. And people can connect to that and then connect to the World Wide Web. Okay, so now I want to shift to our next slide, slide 5, with slide 4, I apologize, but talking about net neutrality. And this is a very hot topic in the recent months. What I want us to talk a little bit about, this is one of the most interesting things that I found in this subject. We talked a lot about hardware and different tangible things, but now we're getting more into laws and regulations and guidelines. And the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, And what their goal is to regulate and enforce and implement any rules and regulations on anything in the communications realm. And so obviously the internet would fall under their umbrella. And so in recent years, they've been thinking about what is the best way to handle the internet. How much control should the government have? How little control should the government have? And in 2015, it was really pushed by President Barack Obama at the time to implement net neutrality. And what net neutrality was is it put rules and regulations on the internet, which cause internet service providers, which is people that just provide access to the internet, it forbid them from throttling internet, which means slowing it down or speeding it up, depending on which website you are visiting. And this had huge implications on the market, because that way every single person that has access to the internet could access any website in the world at the same speed or at the same price that they wanted to. But recently, one of the things that our book didn't even cover is that there's been some changes in this since President Trump took office. The FCC leader and that commission repealed the net neutrality about 6 months ago, and they're still working to put some things in place to see what this new world is going to look like without net neutrality. Some people fear that it will allow internet service providers to now throttle websites and redirect people to their own websites. For example, Comcast is an internet service provider, and the largest consumer of bandwidth on the internet is Netflix. And Netflix is, like many of you know, is a video streaming application. And so that streaming service is in direct contrast to Comcast. And so if Comcast wanted to, without net neutrality, they could either limit or charge you extra to access Netflix content. And what people believe this would cause them to do is you would either then have to choose another internet service provider, or pay extra to not access things like Netflix, or instead use Comcast for your streaming services as opposed to using Netflix. Some people are very fearful of the implications that this could have. Some people are excited about what this could have, because it could allow competition finally, and just the free market to work at its best. And I think many Americans are very much support of a free market economy, and so they are under the understanding that the internet should be in the same realm, that a free market and competition will drive prices lower, create innovation, and give the best possibility for the consumer. With that being so there's a lot of mixed emotions, but it's constantly changing. Like I said, that they're still trying to implement all that the FCC rolled out back in November of 2017, and even Congress is trying to step in and repeal what the FCC did. If they had, as of 2 days ago, they had enough signatures to begin a conversation about this, and if it goes to Congress floor and passes it, then it'll go to the president's desk, and he'll have a chance to review it. So there's a lot up in the air still about net neutrality, whether it's the best for our society or not. There's a lot of different opinions on that. But this has a lot to do with what we're talking about with bandwidth and home networks. So we can go on to our next slide, some recent developments. One of the big things that the Obama administration did is they created the National Broadband Plan. And what this was a desire to see 99% of the nation's schools connected to high-speed internet. And so this was what many believed a huge advancement in education, or would be, and many people are fighting to make sure this is carried out, and think this will have huge implications on our education system and really give our students the advantage. Also, the FCC wanted to connect America, and one of the ways that they plan to do this is that they've always initiated a universal service charge that for all internet use. This was usually charged to internet service providers, but instead of paying it elsewhere, that they have now concentrated that universal service charge to take internet to 7 million Americans in the next 6 years. In rural areas, people that don't have access to the internet now just because of where they live. And so they're going to take that fee that they was already collecting and redirect it to take internet to these 7 million Americans in the next 6 years. They also believe that this will create over 500,000 jobs and over $50 billion in growth in the economy. And so if they're right in this, this will have huge implications on our economy and just really positively affect many, many Americans. Also, some other recent developments is the more internet access that we need, they need the space to do that. And one of the places they've seen space to stream internet and create broadband is in white space. And what white space is that TV providers have unused space whenever they are sending out their television signals, and it's called white space. And so what internet service providers have tried to do is try to claim that white space, the space that's not being used. And the FCC has actually ruled in their favor and told them that it was actually okay for them to claim that unused white space to get more people access to more internet. Also, there's been even more recent developments where that white space is going to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. And the goal is just to connect more people to the internet and create more jobs and, like I said, more access. So if we can go ahead and go to our next slide, slide 6, and just talking about the current and future status of our internet connection. U.S. is actually just really average in our broadband penetration. For every 100 Americans, about 32 of those Americans are connected to high-speed internet. And there's about 365 million broadband users worldwide. We expect to see that number constantly increase, with costs being the number one reason that this number is not higher, right? Because we know internet is not a necessity, at least not yet. But what we expect, the more and more it's incorporated in everyday life, and the more competition increases, the lower the cost will probably become, the more accessible it will be. So that number of 365 million broadband users is expected to drastically increase over the next several years. Another thing that's really on the horizon is spectrum auctions. It's one of the things that we talked about with the last slide, is that this white space is constantly being auctioned now, and which is just really creating a lot of space for innovation and hopefully making everyone happy by paying those that have the space and then allowing for more internet connection. One of the things that we'll probably see in the not so distant future is usage-based pricing. This is already being implemented in some areas, and what this looks like would be internet access in your home the way that you have access on your cell phones. Many people today have data plans where they can only use so much data per month. For example, me and my family, we have 15 gigabytes of data per month, and if we go over that, and it is a very absorbent fee that we have to pay for each gigabyte of data over that, and it's very possible that in the near future that's going to be the case for many broadband and home networks in your home. And so look for that on the horizon. Another thing that is just really interesting is that the job market in this area is booming, not to mention just the hardware and the implementation and the research and growth of broadband and home networks, and constantly I'm seeing how we can get that better and better is always growing, but also the need for more and more content. Right, everyone wants to see the newest show and series on Netflix or YouTube videos and all these things. And so the more and more that broadband increases to more people, the more content is needed. And so the jobs are just constantly being needed and forever growing in this industry. And so that kind of just summarizes this chapter 19 about broadband, high-speed internet, and how it connects to the home. And so if we want to switch to our last slide, the discussion question, it's where I spend a good deal of our time talking about net neutrality, but I would just love to get your opinions. Should the government regulate the internet through net neutrality, or should it be left up to the free market? What do you think and why? I would love to know. I have many opinions on this as well, and I think it'll be a great discussion. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for tuning in.